Calling all leaders. Whether you're new to management or a seasoned pro, there's one thing we all strive for: building a team culture that truly thrives. Cultivating a rainforest team culture is your opportunity to master leadership with a fresh perspective. Based on Jason Kay's best-selling book, this immersive training offers you actionable strategies to inspire, engage, and empower your team. Leave with a notebook full of insights and plan to transform your office into a thriving, resilient rainforest. This is your moment. Register now at www.jasonkay.com. That's www.jasonkae.com.
Welcome to Beyond the Work, Tales in Multifamily Maintenance. My name is Chris Caramano. As a 15-plus year veteran in the apartment industry, I have stories to tell, a desire to hear and tell others' stories. As a multiple committee member for NAA, a CAMT advisory board member and a CAMT holder, and a national presenter and educator, I have met and worked with so many great people in our industry at all different levels. This is not going to be a how-to podcast. This is going to be a how-did podcast. We are going to explore the how-did tales in multifamily maintenance. How did we do it? How did we learn from it? How did we grow? How did we decide not to do it again? Join me as we go beyond the work.
Andy Goldberg of RestoreCore, thank you so much for joining me today on Tales in Multifamily Maintenance on Beyond the Work. I really appreciate your time today.
It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me on your show.
So, Andy, you and I go back a few years. You and I were in the Leadership Lyceum class at NAA during COVID. We were the COVID class, and that's, I think, where we first met and connected. But for my viewing and listening audience, give me a little bit of your background and how you as a vendor got into the multifamily industry, which I think is an interesting story.
Yeah, I'll try and give you the quick version of it because, as most entrepreneurs, it's not like a straight path from I want to go do disaster restoration for the multifamily world from that idea to being a successful supplier of those services. I'll go back to 1994 though, which is, nice, like 30 years ago plus. I was a young guy working for my dad. My dad's a licensed master plumber and a licensed master electrician. And we had a lot of clients that owned homes and businesses. And there's a really bad storm. And every single one of our clients, like every single client we had ice damming. So all their houses and businesses all got flooded. And we're in there doing all these, cleaning up after all these messes, not doing a particularly good job of it either, by the way, but we got to meet a number of insurance adjusters during that process. And a few of them were like, if you could make these people happy, would you be interested in doing more work like this? And we were like, sure. So, the next year we got into the disaster restoration business. And I put on a student time, started knocking on the door of insurance agents and adjusters. And within a year, we had tripled the size of the business and away we went. So that was back in 1995 when we started RestoreCore. Then in 2003, most of the work we were doing at that time was for detached single family homes, doing, a lot of work for like the State Farm, the Travelers, and the big insurance companies out there. Around 2001 or so, we were about 40% of our business was with one client, State Farm. And we were really happy. They were a great client for us. Well, they came out with this new program that just wasn't for us. We had to buy all of our materials directly from Home Depot, but we didn't pay for them. They paid for them. And it was just a very convoluted program. And I got a phone call one day saying they no longer want us part of their program. So we lost 40% of our business in a day. And I had a lot of employees and a lot of families to keep going. So I put on my suit and tie again and started knocking on doors. And, in retrospect, it was the best day of my life, was that moment where I got pulled off that program and got the carpet yanked out from underneath me. And I decided I'm never going to let anything like that happen again. I'm not going to be dependent on one customer for that much business. And, and that's at that moment, that's when I really decided that our business is going to come from commercial property management companies and residential, rental communities and condos. So we really shifted our focus towards the commercial marketplace. And now 98 or 99% of our work is coming from end users, and mostly property management companies, primarily either market rate or affordable rental housing. And we do quite a bit of work in the condominium world. We do a lot of privatized military housing is big clients for us, as well as we do a lot in healthcare. So we do a lot of work for some of the bigger hospital systems out there. So that's where most of the work that we have comes from. We'll still do the occasional detached single family, but usually it's someone like we personally know, and it's more or less a favor.
Right, right. So yeah, even as a supplier or, vendor partner, that's a really interesting way to get into multifamily. And I find it, that probably took a lot of risk on your part because you were going into an industry that you didn't know anything about, which a lot of us do when we fall into the multifamily industry. But as a supplier, you lost, as you said, 40% of your business with one client overnight. So, bravo to you, because I think that even on this, it shows the story of, even on the supplier side, how stable the multifamily housing industry is.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, it really made a huge difference for me that we were members at the time of the AACP, which is now part of the Pennsylvania Apartment Association. But we had joined there only because one of our big clients at the time, PMI, which is still one of our top clients, basically told us that we had to join the AACP at the time because they were on the board and they're like, you need to join this. And not only that, but you also have to support our awards, which are now the Keystone Awards, which we're still big supporters of. But I don't know if we would have been able to really have the success without what is now the PAA helping us along the way. When I got there, I just talked to a lot of people who were in the industry. And really in 2003, when we joined the AAGP, which, they're all now, that was the Apartment Association of Greater Philadelphia. The AACP was the Apartment Association of Central PA, and the PAA is the Pennsylvania Apartment Association, which I think about 5 years ago, they finally rolled them all up into one big organization that has like 300,000 units. So I kind of grew up with a lot of these associations, but really, I got a really great piece of advice from Larry Falco. I think a lot of people in the industry know Larry, but he just says, Andy, if you want to be successful, all you need to do is just show up and go to everything. And I just said, all right, well, Larry seems like a pretty smart guy and pretty successful. And, I know he knows what's going on because he had that magazine called the Apps Magazine, which was a great magazine. Larry, maybe you should bring it back. Anyway, I went to everything. I just started showing up to every single event that I could. And I think that, it didn't hurt that we had a product out there that I think that people wanted and that we knew what we were doing in the disaster restoration space, and that we, always made sure that we lived out our core values and made sure that we were doing the right thing for the right people at the right time. And, learned a lot along the way as well. My favorite quote in the world is good experience as a result of good judgment as a result of bad experience. I've had a lot of learning lessons along the way, and, happy to share a couple of those with you here today.
That's amazing. So Andy, you and I got to know each other. We've gotten to know each other over the last few years. Your company is one of my remediation companies, full disclosure. You've done disaster work, remediation work, mitigation work at many of my incidences. And I think every time I see you, I say, I hope it's the last time we're going to talk about business, because if I have to call you, it's never a good thing, right? So I'm honored to be talking to you without having to tell you about a fire I had last night or a pipe burst that I had last night, or, so this is for me personally, it is nice to just have a conversation that doesn't involve, we'll be there in an hour, Chris, don't worry. We got you.
Well, you can call me later on, right? Oh, we're ready. We're 24/7.
Yeah. Don't jinx me, my friend.
Eat yourself. I can't help it.
I'll provide an update in the comments when this airs if I had to call Andy immediately after this. So I think that, that being said, is the hardest phone call to make is to, you're in the middle of an incident. You have let's just go with a flood, a sprinkler pipe burst. We're recording this in the middle of February. Outside temperatures are sub 20. Every night there's a lot of freezing pipes, expanding pipes, and before you even know it, a pipe is burst. Mm-hmm. I've experienced that more times than I can count this winter, unfortunately. We've had some very unseasonably cold snaps here in the Northeast, stretching days, which is usually not what we're used to seeing the last few years. What it's the hardest thing from the property management side or the facility side when these things happen, right? Because there's so many moving pieces. You have a disaster. You have to take care of your residents. You have to take care of your asset and have to get somebody to do the work, whether you're going to do it in-house or you're going to hire a professional remediation company. So what are some tips or stories that you may have for the audience about when is the right time to call a restoration vendor to help you out?
Well, I would start that out by saying the right time to call it the restoration vendor, or as I like to call us, supplier partners, is before you have a loss. It's a lot better to have us come out there, meet your team, look at the property, get to know us, let us get to know you prior to the loss occurring, and have like a good idea, like here's where we like to park, here's where the all the items are. And we could talk about, having disaster planning and everything else, but just having the idea of having our team out there on property prior to the loss occur is actually the best time to contact us. And then after that, as soon as possible, because the faster that we get out to the site, the less damage you have. Sometimes we might be working on a property and all of a sudden, especially during the freezing, we once had a job where we got called out to do a flooded unit from a broken pipe. And we cleaned it up, and then we got in a truck. We were leaving. The maintenance super flags us down, wouldn't let us leave, and it's like, you got another one. And I think we ended up doing 24 units. And I think we tried to leave 6 or 7 times that night. So, but I could tell you, like the first one was a lot worse than all the ones subsequently, because we were right there to be able to just go back through and get everything cleaned up as the water was almost like pouring out. So, I guess maybe the move would have been at some point just to shut the water off to the whole property. Maybe, I don't know. But, the damage is done there at that point. I would just say that when you're there's a couple different scenarios of how these disasters unfold, right? A lot of times, most of the work day in, day out, we're just getting a call here or there because something random happened. Somebody was cooking and set off a fire sprinkler, or, a lot of times, somebody just knocks a fire sprinkler off the wall, and water discharges, and, it's just a normal day. And I would just say that, on average, we're probably operating at 25% of our normal capacity, right? Like if we got 4 times as many calls come in on a normal Tuesday, we could probably handle it without having to bring in any extra outside resources. When you have a situation like you just explained, where you have multiple losses going off at the same time, every single one of our clients is having multiple losses going off at the same time. So all of a sudden, the need it goes from 25% capacity to 1,000% capacity or 2,000% capacity. Now we have, 150 employees spread out over a number of states, and we can, if it's a localized event, we can muster resources, and then we have a lot of other resources that we could bring to bear on a situation like that. But what I can tell you is that whoever calls us first is where we're normally going first. We do have priority service agreements in place with certain customers where we're going to be putting them higher up on the list. So that kind of goes along with the whole idea of having us out there beforehand, meeting the team, signing up a priority service agreement where you're going to be at the top of the list and not waiting on the second list, which could be 12 hours. It could be 12 days till we burn through the end of one of those lists if it's a really major event that happens. But even the freezing that happened a few weeks ago, we were able to, because we had resources in multiple areas and it didn't hit every area as bad, we were able to pretty much get to almost every single loss within a few hours. I think there was 2 or 3 losses that we scheduled the next morning, if we were out there the first and the very next day. So it does happen from time to time where we get that backed up. But for the most part, the sooner you call us, the less time you're going to be waiting, especially if there's a big disaster going area-wide.
Yeah, and I think that's important on a couple different notes, but it's important for my viewers and listeners to really think about is that, our supplier partners are just stretched. See, I use supplier partners, Andy. They're just stretched. When we are experiencing events, they are right? A supplier partner may be stretched thin, may not have a typical response time, no matter how much business, even if you have a priority level service agreement with them. And sometimes we have to work with our supplier partners and be a little bit more understanding, and know that everybody is working towards the end goal of fixing the problem or mitigating the problem. And I think that a lot of times I'll get a call, well, just make a call to so-and-so and just get it done. It's like, yeah, but there's that person that I'm trying to reach out to is also getting inundated with work and calls. And sometimes they can't stretch their, manpower, their labor, their materials across, their required needs. Just like we have a hard time servicing. If I have to service 150 apartments at once, during a massive event, it's way more logistically complicated and stretches us far too thin unless I have to do like one or two. It's a huge difference. And you experience that as a supplier partner. But the disaster planning thing to me was very interesting because I don't think that's something that enough people do. And I will also say I've really never done it before, is invited a supplier partner that deals specifically in emergency services or emergency restoration work to walk the property, help do an inspection, to learn the layout, learn where valves are, I think that's really important, not just for emergency service or emergency remediation vendors, but any of your vendors, any of your supplier partners that you work with, really, to have that. Hey, listen, this is where the electrical panels are. This is where our gas shutoffs are. Everybody kind of knows the layout of your properties. And I think about my fire departments. Every time we open a new building or we rehab a building, the first thing we do is we do a walkthrough with the fire department. I love when the fire department wants to do a walkthrough because they're training their, either volunteer, their paid team, plus they're learning the building. So in case of an emergency, they're actually know the layout. Everybody knows what staircases to use and where the keys are and how the doors operate. So what are some of the things that on-site team members can be on the lookout for? Because disasters happen, right? Accidents happen. A pipe is going to burst. A resident is going to set a stove on fire. There'll be a natural weather event, right? But what are some of the things that you can think of that people can do at the site to be on the lookout for? What could they be on the lookout for?
Yeah. And just
to mitigate some of these things before they even happen.
Just to back up on your story about how we could be experiencing a disaster when the disaster happens during Superstorm Sandy, our warehouse in Madison, New Jersey flooded. I remember walking in the door there and there was literally fish in our warehouse. Obviously, we immediately got the warehouse, gutted out, put a generator up. Somehow or another, we had no cell phone service or phone service, but we were able to operate out of there within 12 hours, in the entire office park that we were in and Raritan was completely flooded. So probably had signed up 3 buildings right within 3 blocks of us. But yeah, we definitely learned our lesson that when we're looking for new locations to not be
higher ground.
So anyway, yeah, just on the disaster planning side, there's a lot of things that you want to know. The whole idea is that you want your team to be ready for disaster prior to the disaster happening. And we have a product called Secure Core that we sell to the multifamily industry that basically builds a disaster plan for each one of their communities. It just has information, very helpful information such as photographs and directions on how to disable all the shut-off valves. We had a client in Allentown and it was a really hot day actually, and a sprinkler valve in the attic fired off. I think it was that the attic probably got up to 120, 130 degrees and the sprinkler had just kind of melted and fired off possibly. Well, the maintenance tech who was on call was at the tire store getting his tires changed on his car. So he had to call an Uber until he got there 40 minutes later. And it was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it was $400,000 claim, but it was all said and done. Yeah, the situation could have been solved if the property manager had an app in their pocket where they could go there and look and see how to turn off the sprinkler system and stop the problem from getting a lot worse. So, just having something like that's really important. Having a list of call out numbers for all your team and staff, having a evacuation plan is not just needed. Sometimes it's legally required to have that evacuation plan. And then what to do if there's an active shooter on your what to do if there's a gas leak, what to do if there's a chemical spill. You know, a lot of people are saying, well, rely on FEMA, but like, even like, you remember about 20 years ago, there was a chemical train derailment in Paulsboro, New Jersey, I believe. FEMA botched it. They gave people bad advice and people got injured. And, there's a bunch of people that had permanent injuries from the chemical spill. FEMA didn't give them the right information. There's a lot of things that you want to put into the disaster plan that will help you recover faster. The most important thing to think about when you think about disaster planning is that you want to have the plan put in place so that when the actual disaster happens, you're spending your time performing things such as responding to the initial disaster and then going right into recovery, and not spending any extra time than you need to on planning on what you should be doing. You're making all those decisions on a beautiful day where the sun's out and you have all the time in the world to plan out, okay, what are we going to do? Who are we going to call? Who's going to do what? A lot of it also is what would you do with your residents? What would you do with your team? So if a disaster is going on, where's the emergency response people supposed to meet? Where are your residents going to meet? Where is your staff going to meet? Who's going to be in charge of helping the residents? Who on your team is going to be in charge of being the liaison between the emergency responders and your company? Who's going to be in charge of the maintenance team and what they need to possibly do? Who's going to be in charge of, the leasing staff who might need to now all of a sudden relocate 200 residents? And it's just really interesting how, like we've had jobs before where, it's like the communication has to be really tight. We were doing a project once where a 200 unit building had a bad fire in one of the units, and the entire building was condemned by the township. The township came back out and they released the building. And then the newscaster on the news said the building's now been released back to the property. All of a sudden, and this is a lot of old people living here. And now all of a sudden, like, these cars with all the kids are dropping their parents off back at the place, and the place was not ready to take anybody. And it was like, they could not get rid of these people fast enough, apparently. I don't know what the heck was going on with these families. If you live in property management, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, that was a property where, we had to actually literally go in and smoke clean 200 units. I think we did it in about 6 or 7 days to get 200 units back up and get the building back occupied again. But that's just another case where, like, the communication that people were listening on the news, as soon as they heard that, they're like, oh, time to get back to
get them back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in general, disaster planning, hopefully nobody ever needs it, but you have to have it. So if there is an incident, you're ready. You know who to call. You know where, you have a plan, because it just recently came up. I was doing something else for the network, and I was thinking about a quote Benjamin Franklin said was, failure to planning to fail is, failure to plan is planning to fail.
Right. Failure to plan is planning to fail. Exactly. Yeah.
Failure to plan is planning to fail. So thank you. I can't believe I tripped over that.
Great quote.
I think that it's one of those things that you hope you never have to have a fire, flood, or blood, but this is a reality of our situation and our industry, that this stuff happens. Something that's always interesting to me is the phone call or the work order that is, I have mold. I have lost count on how many times, and it's even better when they say, I have black mold. There's no such thing as black mold. It is not an unpopular opinion. It is a fact. Mold doesn't even come in the color black. It just looks black. There's no such thing as black mold. But we get
toxic black mold. That's my favorite.
Toxic. That's one step above. Black mold is bad. Toxic black mold is even worse. It sounds good on television when they use it in news stories or when they use it, in TV shows. But it's not really a thing. I like to say assumed mold growth, right? Because you don't know what mold is until it's officially tested. But I'm sure you have some great stories about mold. I'm sure all of my listeners here have stories of mold. But what's a good tale that you have regarding mold growth, or a couple? Well, what can some of my audience can take away from these?
We call it suspected microbial amplification, just to, confuse everybody.
Love it. I love it.
So, and I mean, just remember, so mold is, it's a living organism. And what you're basically dealing with is chemical warfare at a microscopic level. So these molds evolved over time. They're fighting over resources, basically over food sources. And through evolution, some species of mold created chemicals inside of their bodies, basically to like overtake other mold colonies. So if you ever see, and there's like a green colony and a red colony, and like the green colony's bigger, winning that war. But what ends up happening is, they're basically sacrificing themselves, and they develop these toxins inside of their structure. So when you kill mold, the mold then decomposes, and these little pieces of their bodies, of the actual cell structures, decompose and become even smaller, and they have these toxins in them, and then they either can absorb through your skin, or they can float and you can inhale them into your lungs. And both are pretty much equal ways to get them into your body. These toxins will go right through your skin. So it's really important, if you are working in mold, that you wear goggles, you wear a mask, and also
Proper PPE.
Body, and wear gloves. But I can't tell you how many mold stories I have, but here's what I'll tell you. It's, in order for you to have a mold problem, it's usually a lot of things have to go. It's usually not just one thing. I always say, like, you're better off having a garden hose going off in your house than like a teaspoon a day of water. That teaspoon of water a day, you'll never really notice, but over time, it will grow. But yeah, I've had a number of situations. Here's an interesting one. We had one where there was somebody called us up and they're like, we need some help on a property. The property itself had mold. We fixed it. We hired a hygienist. The second time they fixed it, that hygienist and contractor, they must not know what they're doing because the mold keeps coming back. We had another hygienist, and that hygienist recommended you to come out. So we go out there, and there's like a lot of people living in this apartment, and there's like a washing machine in the apartment. And I think it's a 1-bedroom apartment. So we're like, how many people live here? And like, well, we have 7 people living in here. We're like, well, the mold's coming from people, right? It's like every person that, I think they say like the average person releases about a quarter cup of water a day into the atmosphere, and, times 7, and they're all in there, and they got the washing machine going and the cooking, and it was like the actual occupancy.
Windows were all closed. They never used their air conditioner to dehumidify the apartment. Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. And then the other thing I would just say is like, we get into them where like there might be a really small leak and a lot of mold. And so that's sometimes an equivalent to itself. It's like, let's go hunt and find out what's going on. So we had one where there was like a drain line from the washing machine above was leaking. But then we found there was, as we started kind of going down, like it's like the mold started getting less and then started getting more again. And then we found another leak somewhere. And then like we were like, and then we thought we were done. They went back, they tested again. When they came back and tested, like, nope, there's still more mold. So then all of a sudden we realized like in the in the floor joist, there was a pipe that ran to an outside spigot, and it had like, I think it was like that type M copper that has all those little pinhole leaks in it. So it's just spraying water up. The house was a pretty bad project. We eventually got it all cleaned up, but we basically had to gut out the entire unit. I'm sure the property manager was not happy when they saw the bill and how much damage we did. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I think like any one of those leaks alone caused as much damage as, when you have all 3 of those together. So a lot of times what we find is that, a little bit of water could sometimes cause a little bit of mold, but when you have a lot of mold and a little bit of water, you got to keep looking and finding out like, why is there this much of a problem? I know I had another one where it was just like the sprinkler outside from the irrigation system. They had like an irrigation system for the lawn, but like the nozzle was just spraying water on the building almost every single day. And when you think about building, I think you look at a building, you look at walls. I look at the building, I look at a moisture sink. And so if you have a building that's made out of concrete and block and brick, that can hold a lot of water before it will start to cause a problem. If you have a building that's made out of metal studs and styrofoam and stucco and insulation, there's nowhere for that moisture to kind of absorb into. Even wood is a better moisture sink than what I just described there. Like obviously you don't want the wood to get too wet. Thinking about wood is like, you look at a piece of wood, it says SPF 19 on it, which means that it's been killed, dried down to 19. The moisture content of that wood is 19% of the weight of the wood. Once if that wood gets wet and goes over 24%, and then it'll keep rotting until it gets back down to like that 19 SPF again. So it's really important that you dry that wood all the way out. So when we're in a water mitigation job, we're always testing the wood to make sure. We like to get the wood down to like 15, 12% or even less. Try and get it, it's hard to get back down to like whatever the normal was, but we want to make sure it gets below that 19% to turn off that mold, that rot switch that's in every piece of wood that's out there. When you cut down if you cut down a live tree, the moisture content in that wood could be 200% of the actual weight of the wood. So it's pretty interesting how that works. You got to be very careful when you have a water damage job that you don't turn into a mold job.
Yeah. And, mold needs three things to grow. It needs a food source, and that's usually what you can visibly see the mold growing on, whether that's wood, drywall, any kind of flooring material is typically your food source. Oxygen is not going to go away, which is the second of the three things that it needs. It would be great if we could, vacuum seal these apartments until the molds died and went away, but we can't do that. And the last thing is water. So whenever somebody tells me I see water staining or I hear a report of mold, and I say, where did the water come from? And, much to your point, Eddie, it's, they look at me and they go, oh, well, it's just mold. Like, there's no water. I'm like, no, there's water, because there's three ingredients to this cake. And I already know two of them, but I don't know where the third one's coming from, right? I don't know where is the water. And that's sometimes water is one of the most difficult things to find, your water source. And I think people need to know that it's really important. Find where the water is coming from, stop the source of the water, and then mitigate. Because far too often we do the remediation work and nobody has found the water. We have scraped, we've painted, we've removed, we've put in new, and nobody found the source of the water. And we're back to your story of, we don't understand. Well, you don't understand because you never found the source of the water. You never found the third ingredient that you were missing.
Right. And I mean, there's a couple other things that also factor in, like temperature, and if you have airflow, that could slow down mold. So that's why you have things in a water situation, if you have water damage, to slow it down. And then it doesn't like UV light either. So UV light is a good way to get rid of molds. But just think, behind every single wall that you have drywall on is food source, darkness, temperature. It's all everything's there. The only thing that's missing is the moisture. So the moisture is the important thing. But I will say this, is that if you don't have a food source and you have a way for the water to get out of your property, there's cases out there where the water is going to come in, like when you think about maybe a basement where you have like water issues. You can design, you can engineer systems that can allow moisture to come into your building, as long as you have a way for it to get out without encountering a food source and not allowing to create mold. But for the most part, you want to keep the moisture out of your building or have a way for it to get out.
Andy, let's talk about sources of water. You need a water source, and you need, food and oxygen. But a lot of times you can't find the water source, or you may have an area where you don't think that you have the food source, like a basement or something like that. How can sites really manage when they just don't know where it's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, that's often the hardest part. And, there's been a lot of progress in the world of building science. And I think over the past 20 years, a lot of the builders are paying close attention to, how am I going to build this building to keep the water out? You see, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as a zip wall. Now every single house, when they build, they put a zip wall up. They're really working on water management. And they want to make sure they have like a proper drainage plane, so that any water that gets behind the facade is draining back out in the proper ways. The builders that didn't pay attention to that, a lot of those builders are out of business now because they've gotten sued for having basically built houses that are filled with mold. So there's been a lot of advancement over the years. And, back, 50 years ago, when people built buildings out of concrete block and brick, it wasn't really that big of an issue because the block and the brick were basically a moisture sink that, they would absorb the moisture as it came in. So it just, probably between like the 1970s and the late 90s. So a lot of houses and buildings that were built that were, quote unquote, valued engineered to like support a lot of mold growth. And we get called out to a lot of those properties often. And there's only so much you could do from a, re-engineering of the building, but you got to just make sure that you keep as much moisture out as possible. And sometimes we've had a couple projects where we've had to go in and basically, tear the whole building apart and put it all back together the right way.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me the things that we see in our business. We spent a lot of time talking about mold, but one time you were telling me about a call you received where a resident thought they were getting sick from mold, and it was not mold. It was something completely different.
Yeah,
you remember us talking about that?
It was actually an office building, and like the workers were all feeling ill, and they thought they had like, the coughing and the wheezing, and they called over and they're like, we think we have a mold problem because everyone's kind of has these like symptoms and they all have the same symptoms. We're like, well, do you see mold? They're like, we don't see any mold. I was like, why don't you bring in an industrial hygienist? So they hired an industrial hygienist. He came out and he took air samples and he gets the results back from the lab, and he immediately calls over to the building and says, evacuate the building immediately. And they're like, what do you mean evacuate the building immediately? He's like, well, I just got the labs back and there's not one spore of mold in the entire building. And that means that you probably have a carbon monoxide leak, and it's probably extremely dangerous, and like call the fire department as well. So like the fire department came over, immediately found that there was like a faulty water heater. Yeah, and they're just lucky that nobody really got badly injured.
Yeah, that's the hard part with what we do, right? We only have a certain amount of information. We automatically assume that it could be mold, just like our residents would, but we need to cut out all of the different variables to really hone in on what it is, because, is the resident getting sick? Okay, do you have any signs of you have any visible signs of mold? Okay, if you don't have any visible signs of mold and you've looked at your ductwork and, you got to look for other sources. Sometimes we get so fixated on, especially in the maintenance world, right? Like, somebody's got a problem, I'm going to fix it. But sometimes we need to take that step back and look at the entire situation and all the possible scenarios and all the possible variables. I want to wrap this section, but and talk to you a little bit about something completely different. But I wanted to see if you had any takeaways on, for the audience on whether it be disaster planning or best practices on working with a supplier partner that they can take away.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that, on the best practices for disaster planning is, pick out your suppliers that you're going to use, your partners prior to the disaster, and talk to them. Do you offer 24/7 service, like for your electricians, your plumbers? And if so, how do I access that? The last thing that you want to do is be in a situation where you really need a service, and you don't have access to the tools or the people that you need in order to solve whatever problem you're facing. I've been in this a long time, so chances are that there's going to be situations that come up that you could never predict that could ever possibly happen. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm still learning a lot every week. It's like, wow, can't believe that's actually a thing. And a lot of times the other part of our business is a lot of times we're meeting people like on one of the worst days or the worst day of their lives, where, as a maintenance, somebody in the maintenance world or in the property management world, sometimes the decisions you make can affect the outcomes as far as whether or not people live or die or get seriously injured. And, there's a lot of things that could happen in your building that are really, really bad. And unfortunately for us, and this is one of the sad parts of our business, is like we sometimes are like, on the front lines of these really bad things. We see a lot, and people tell me like, I walk into somebody's apartment, I see candles, and all I see is fire. Right? That's just sure. I look at things differently than you did. I'm like, all right, we're not burning any candles in this apartment.
Yeah, I'm well known for scoping out, sprinkler systems in restaurants or theaters. Like I'm just always aware of how a building is built and, what
Yeah.
fire protection systems are in place and where the exits are. And it sounds ridiculous, but I've done this so long, right? I'm always looking for, don't even get me started. And I know you spend a lot of time in hotels as well, but in your travels, much like me, but oh my God, I pick apart every single hotel room I'm in like it's a vacant unit turnover. I feel like I want to leave a list at the front desk when I leave because I just did their job for them. I inspected the hotel room.
Same exact feeling. If I'm in a movie theater, I'm looking where the exits are.
Yeah, just because we've seen the worst of we've seen the worst of the worst until the next day, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
always the worst until the next thing happens, and that happens to be worse. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I learned this fairly recently in one of our previous conversations at an association event. You do a lot of association work, both at the national level and with your local affiliates that, you work with. You've mentioned PAA. I know you work with the New Jersey Apartment Association, several other associations, but you're a member of the board of directors for an organization called Hope and Door. And I didn't know about it until recently. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to educate both me and my listening audience and viewing audience on what is Hope and Door. And, let's talk a little bit about it. What do they do?
Yeah. So Hope and Door is a organization that's created by, it's founded by Dan Berger, who owns Berger rental properties. And they're a large property owner here in the Philadelphia and Maryland markets. And it's a organization that's designed to prevent homelessness in families for people that have a one-time financial emergency. So what they're looking for is somebody who's over the past 12 months hasn't been late on a rental payment, somebody whose income stream that may have been disrupted by this financial emergency has been restored. So they're going to continue to be a good tenant for you or a good resident for you, and who had a one-time financial emergency. What we found is that when we help these people, that 90% of the time, they're able to stay in their home a year later. But if we didn't help them, they were going to get evicted. So these people were going to be evicted. We just had one a couple of weeks ago. There was a child in the home. The child had a medical issue where they couldn't swallow properly. And the family, if your choice is to save your child or go to work, every single person who's watching this is going to go save their child. But they missed hours from work and they weren't able to make their rent payments. So we stepped up. We paid 2 months of their rent. The child's now well again. They're still in the home. If not, they didn't have enough money to ever catch up. And, if you're following fair housing, even if you wanted to help that family, you couldn't because the guy next door who, is behind his rent, you didn't help him. So now all of a sudden you're not treating all your residents fairly. I don't know. I'm not the expert in fair housing, but my understanding is it's very difficult to favorites like that, no matter how much you want to. So what we would do is we have a application. You can go online to the Hope and Door website or contact me if you want, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with. And we want to try and help as many families as possible. We do a lot of fundraising and we have funding, and we're looking for partners out there. And really, we're looking for landlords out there that have people who are in their communities who are, if not for this one-time financial emergency, would be a great tenant. What we found is that 25% of the people that we're helping have some sort of medical issue, either for them or their family member. And 50% of them had some sort of job. They lost their job or they lost some of their income or they lost hours. We had one where the guy worked in a factory and he was furloughed for 6 weeks while they furloughed the factory. Right. And so he just wasn't going to be able to make his rent payment for a month or two. And the job was coming back in 6 weeks. So we helped him along, and we do more than just give out the grants. I mean, we have, the people that actually deliver the services. A lot of times people call in, they may not even qualify for the grant, but we'll have a list of 15 other service places they could go, Catholic services, or there's a whole list of places you go for helps. the one that you called back, she's at the 11th one on your list of 15, gave me the funds to keep us in the house because, they didn't quite qualify for what we had and they were able to stay. So
That's amazing.
When you think about it, for the landlord, the rent payment is the least expensive part of it because they're going to have to re-lease the apartment. They're going to have to do a turnover and they're going to have to pay additional, there's going to be additional costs to actually follow through on that eviction. And for me, the most important thing and the most satisfying part of being part of this charity is the families that we help stay in safe, stable housing. Because we all know that if they actually do get evicted, that eviction, we all know, like, nobody's going to rent to that family for the next 7 years, right? And who will? We all know where they're going to have to go live. And it's not going to be in a place that you would ever want to call home.
Well, the organization is doing amazing work. You are a great advocate for the organization and as a member of the board. For listening audience, the website is hopeanddoor.org, and you could find out how residents could either apply for an emergency relief grant or if you're interested in making a donation. Hope and Door is a 501c3 organization, and you can go to their website and do donations. There'll also be a link in the comments and the show notes wherever you are listening or watching this show. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss some of your philanthropy efforts as well, Andy, because I think it's giving back, whether it's through volunteerism or through philanthropy, is extremely important no matter what you're doing. But we work in an industry where we have an opportunity to help people. And it's nice to see that you help people in various ways, whether it's making them safe in their homes or making sure that their homes are still there for them if they're in an emergency. So thank you for that and everything that you do.
Well, you're very welcome. If anybody wants to know more about Hope and Door, I welcome them just to give me a call. Like, we are aggressively looking for people out there that would be willing to refer us people that need help, because I hate to say it, but I think we've been more successful raising money than finding places to where people that need the help. And there's a lot of people out there that do need the help. I just think getting the message out isn't that easy to do, because it's just, probably once a year in a community is what we kind of think. That's kind of like our back of the envelope is like most communities will have one family once a year where something like this may take place. Well, there's thousands of communities out there, but getting the word out to all of them is a challenge. So we're trying hard to spread the word. So you do not need to be a donor in order for one of your residents to qualify. And, but if you want to learn more about the charity, please let us know. We feel as though this is like the one charity that was really designed specifically for our industry.
Great. Well, hopefully, with the power of my podcast and the Multifamily Media Network, we'll get some information out there about Hope and Door to the larger multifamily industry, because I know that you do work throughout the U.S. So thank you for that. In closing, Andy, thank you so much for joining me today on Beyond the Work Tales and Multifamily Maintenance. It was good catching up with you and learning a little bit more about the services that supplier partners like yourself provide to our industry and some of the things that we can do on site to mitigate disasters or prepare for disasters. Thank you for your time today, Andy. It's appreciated.
You're very welcome.
Well, thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Beyond the Work Tales and Multifamily Maintenance, powered by the Multifamily Media Network. And we'll talk to you next time. Everybody's got a tale to tell.
Thank you for joining me for this episode. No matter how long you've been in our industry or what position you have at your company or your community, everyone has a maintenance story to tell. Go to www.multifamilymedianetwork.com and leave me a voice message or share your information, and we can tell your tale together on a future episode. Please check out our sponsors and like, subscribe, and follow to this podcast or video, and join the Multifamily Media News Network newsletter for upcoming shows and blogs from me and the other great hosts on our network. Our stories all connect us. See you for the next chapter.